go ringing that for me. Well, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Mandy Jefferson and I'm the Grazing Project Officer with Reef Catchments. Been there for about 4 years now. It's a bit of a tough gig coming up here after Dr. Jones, but luckily I'm just introducing and not presenting. No pressure. So in 2018, RCS, with funding from the Queensland Government Reef Water Quality Program, joined forces with Fitzroy Basin Association and Reef Catchments to establish the Grassroots project. The focus of the project was to reduce sediment and particulate nutrient losses to waterways by supporting the grazing enterprises to adopt best management practices tailored to their specific circumstances. So 25 grazing enterprises across the two regions took part in project activities, which included attending the RCS Grazing for Profit School, Soil Health Workshop and Next Steps program, property planning advice, annual financial benchmarking and business analysis via the RCS Profit Probe, and funding for implementing change on farm. The project helped landholders to identify and implement practices that help improve their profitability and their land condition, and identify, test, validate and demonstrate innovative and cost-effective practices. A key premise of the project was that improved property management skills could deliver both economic and environmental returns. The project is currently in its final stages, but before completion in June 2020, we'll offer project participants and other landholders the opportunity to take part in 2 RCS-led activities. The flyers for these can be found in your symposium booklets after the piece on Sharon. The first is the RCS Grazing Clinic, a 2.5-day workshop, practical workshop, that aims to develop graziers' skills as grass managers. The second is RCS Grazing Groups, which are 2 one-day workshops that will help implement the skills and principles learnt at the Grazing Clinic. If you're interested in taking part in either of these 2 activities, could you please register your interest with RCS, whose contact details are located at the bottom left of those flyers. I'd now like to introduce one of the Grassroots participants, Sharon Yench, who along with her husband Mark and daughter Bea, manage a grazing operation south of Bowen, and invite her to share their experiences and learnings that they've gained from the Grassroots project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mandy. Good morning to you all. My talk is about water harvesting, but firstly I'll introduce us and what we do. Sharon, my husband Mark, our children Bea and Ted, granddaughter Yolana and Mark's mother Beryl. We have resided at Woodland Station for 14 years. It's 2,347 hectares situated south of Bowen in the dry tropics. Average rainfall 800 millimetres and we're currently running 500 breeders. 5 years ago I completed Alan Savoury's holistic management course. Since then we started to fence paddocks into smaller ones and are still doing it today. This enables more stock shifts and more rested paddocks. A grazing chart helps us keep an eye on our feed budgets from year to year. A very important tool for our cattle movements. All paddocks receive 120 days rest after grazing. Since changing our grazing management, the native grasses and legumes have thickened with renewed vigour. New species pop up regularly. Visual monitoring of our grasses and grazing chart tells us when to offload with feed in reserve. Our policy is always having ground cover. Smaller coolers were sown to kickstart this rundown overgrazed property. Eurocloa, green panic, Primigiteria, Rhodes grass, Guinea grass, Wincassia desmanthus, even a few leftover veggie seeds. More diversity of grasses and legumes, the better the photosynthesis, the better the pasture, happier the cattle, as we all like a variety to eat. Our cattle shift the seeds from new plants now. Okay, yep, next one. 13 years ago, we put in the first of dozens of swales. This particular swale links between two dams to the outer edge of the paddock. Boys are putting a dam in there, so we had to de-energise the flow of water and spread it to hydrate the soil, which helps tremendously for grass growth. Also in that photo you'll see that we only had boa and cooch growing there. We had no grass variety at all, and certainly no cover. We'll just put a drone photo on for you. I'll let that run so you can have a look. This was taken 2 weeks ago, B. Yep. It's still dry. It's the same month, just 13 years later. Benefits can be seen in the first year of a swale, but the full extent of value is seen in 7 years. These figures are endorsed by Permaculture Australia. The paddock is 88 hectares. It's now having its third graze as of 2 days ago. Okay, this is another swale we've put in 2 years ago. What is a swale, first of all? A swale contains two parts, a raised berm and basin. The basin is cut on contour and the berm holds the runoff water. The water then filtrates into the berm and the soil below, slowly with a spread. Swales can vary in different degrees of depth, distance apart, depending on the situation. They can be built in any soil type, even in sand. Swales can be constructed with any manner of machines, small diggers, backhoe, excavator, loader, grader, dozer, scraper. Dee and Mark attended Zaytuna Permaculture Earthworks this year to broaden their knowledge and came away with a more top-down approach to water. These swales are 200 to 250 metres long. They are 2 years old with only one wet season. The reason for these swales is because it was difficult to grow good quality pasture and runoff was obvious. The material out of these swales was used to construct the adjoining road. Various seeds were broadcasted on the swale banks, as were planting of reeds, watergrasses, hymenacne. In the basin, cover is a must, even in the bottom of a swale, if you can do it. It does take a fair time to get the cover in the basin though. This wet season, various trees will be planted adjacent to the swales, which will eventually shade and help evaporation. Mark and I completed RCS and Next Steps course with Terry McCosker last year to keep us in the loop of new ideas and latest concepts. Through RCS and the various groups, we received a $10,000 contribution, for which we matched $2 to $1 input. This is called the Grassroots Project, for which we are most grateful for the contribution. The total cost of this project is $35,000. With this contribution, this is our biggest regen project to date. The paddock is approximately 52 hectares. This paddock was chosen because it had absolutely no topsoil due to very big runoffs and many years before our time of overgrazing. It's exposed to hot southerly winds and obvious evaporation due to lack of cover. It only manages one graze a year with very poor grass recovery. That's drone footage. This is having a drive down the road that we constructed. The works included 100 dozer hours, 23 hours with the scraper, 6 hours with the grader and 24 hours with the loader. These swales are every 2 metres in elevation, and they're a total of 4.4 kilometres long. Each will hold 3,500 litres per lineal metre of water. This equals 3.5 million litres per kilometre. A total of 15.4 million litres for the project, not including the dam. This may be multiplied depending on rain events. It can also be seen the 950 metres of Boxton Form Road with material from the bottom of the swales. This road enables access without erosion. Dozens of species of grasses and legumes have been broadcasted on the swales, as well as mark mulching the banks with tall seeded grasses from the property. We don't waste anything. But this project is not yet completed. After the wet season has started, we will plant out tamarins, albesias, mangoes, bauhinias that naturally grow on the property. We might put in carobs and willows and moringas. Give them a go. Bushes, salt bushes, or broom, or wistringia. Annual and perennial seeds such as cosmos from my flowering garden at home, sunflowers, daikon radish, which go deep for nutrients, poppies, cornflowers to encourage bees, butterflies, insects, which in turn attracts birds and other wildlife. Cattle love to eat flowers too. This is all about this being all above the ground. Can you imagine the changes to the things under the surface? This paddock will be locked up for a year to self-seed and establish trees. This grassroots hydration project should more than double the water in the system and certainly increase the grazing with good grazing management. Something to think about. How much is water worth? The water that falls on your land. This is in our creek beds at the moment. This is now water sitting there, which is pretty good. The idea is having the cover. That's how Mother Nature works. The wind goes over the top, the evaporation becomes quite minimal in watercourses like this, and we like to encourage or mimic Mother Nature, hopefully, in our works. We are all only custodians of our piece of real estate, and it's our legacy to leave it in the best condition possible. Yep, last one. Yep. It's nice looking at water, isn't it? And the last photo. This is our granddaughter Ilana. She's been helping put reed seeds in swales. Just to finish off, we're never too old to start and we're never too young to learn. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you, Sharon. I'll bring out the catch box again because I know there will be a few of you with questions. I had some people approach me asking about swales and how to go about it. So we've got Sharon here. She can tell you a bit more about it. So if you have questions, let me just check we've got it on. Here we go. Better catch this time, please. Watch out!
Oh, no. Okay, I'll go with one. Sharon, when you've, after the 12 months of that paddock being locked up, with your cattle management or your grazing management, will you run that as one paddock or put electric fences across the paddock?
That's a good question. I did forget to mention we have fenced that off. So she's a good hard fence. And we'll be able to control what cattle go in there. I think we'll put some young stuff in there to start with, because a cow or anything pretty heavy going, she'll absolutely flog that paddock. So it's maybe some little heifers or something to start with in the first year, and try and get a couple of grazers out from it then. The fence was actually running down the road there. Should have pointed that out to you.
Yep.
So it's become, one paddock's become two, so that's another bonus.
Yeah, no, the smaller the paddocks and the bigger the herd, the better off you are for short times.
Absolutely,
Yep.
because we need them to fertilise the country for us too.
Sure.
So.
Now, when we went on our road trip a month or so ago, we had a look at, we were on the next door neighbour's farm, we looking at his swales, and we saw yours on the way out, so
Okay.
finished off there, yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks.
it looks different from the drone photos.
Yeah, it certainly does.
They did a top job getting the drone photos. It just gives you a whole different perspective. So
Yeah, I didn't realise how many swales are in there or how many kilometres, because from the road you can just see the couple down the bottom. And
yep.
the full scale of it all. Great.
Thank
Very
you.
good. Oh, shit.
I'm working you out, don't I? So yeah, and I guess paired with holistic grazing land management practices, the idea is then to get that swale covered in your pastures and give it lots of rest between your shifts when you shift your cattle. And then in the end, we have a system that just retains water when it's needed.
That's exactly. We've just got to get everything growing now. So the wet season, I think we'll be out there with shovels or backhoes, whatever we can get in there to get trees in and anything. All my flowering things, I want them all in there after the wet season. So get them all humming.
Yeah. And with the final result, will there be a case study, or can people get some more information of the end product?
We haven't looked that far forward, but you know, perhaps something can be organised where we can have a look at a result in maybe 2 years, or you know. And I just think that it's not finished. It's never finished. It keeps going. It might be 5 years. It might be 10 years is when you're really going to see the total benefit. So we can do stage looking and then our final thing, you know, down the track. And it's not our last project by far.
There will be an RCS kit day sometime next year.
Yeah, I'm not sure what date that is.
So we keep our eyes out, and it's wonderful to see you regenerate your landscape and
we love
rehydrating it.
Yes, giving it a drink.
Yes, giving it a drink. Have we got any more questions or comments? Has anybody got much experience with swales? Do you want to catch? No?
I've got some, but I just did it myself using the flap on my
All right, you can use a shovel if you wish. Yep. Good on you. Yeah. Yeah. No, you can do a shovel around your vegetable garden. You can catch water anywhere. Any machinery questions, you better ask Mark. You know, some of these boys like their machines, so don't ask me those ones.
Mark?
How did you get the germination rates?
No, it's all broadcasted. I've always broadcasted the seed, never had a problem. Whatever comes up, chooses to come up. I don't worry about what doesn't. I look at what's there and see how we can enhance it from there. Some of the seed we have a header and we take our own seed off. We try and save the costs with that. So
I will give the catch box one more round, so just throw it back or leave a comment. It's coming.
It was trying to me. Keep it going. It was pass along.
You have a good question? No? Catch. Just keeping going.
Okay, I'll ask something.
Thank you.
When you were mentioning the species, that tree species, you were mainly mentioning trees that I didn't think were native. Is there a reason that, do you incorporate native ones as well, or you're saying?
Oh, I think that's a great idea. I'm just saving costs by using trees off our place. I've collected the seeds. Now I grow them into trees. So they already grow there, so that's a good place to start. But anything I can get my little grubby hands on, won't cost very much or for free, I'll plant.
Yep.
Chuck it, that's it. Well, thank you so much. Let's put our hands together for Sharon again.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you, Sharon. That was a fantastic talk. I really... No, I mean, you're out there doing it. And like water is just so critical, as we're seeing in New South Wales now. I come from Armidale and we've run out of water, and all the local towns around us have run out of water. And yeah, they just, when there's no water, you go, wow, like it's something we sort of take for granted. And yeah, and also I love the comments that you made about the flowers as well. So let's get on with this and just... but I will come back to some of the comments that you made, and thank you very much for that. In fact, the comment that you made about, you said, has anyone had any experience with swales? And I didn't say anything because I thought, well, I'm going to have the microphone in a minute and I'll have the chance to say it. But there's, at a property near Inverell, which is about an hour and a half from Armidale, I don't know whether any of you are familiar with the Northern Tablelands. I mean, the drought is just incredible. We've just got bare ground everywhere. But there was one place where they did put a big swale in, and it ran off a spring, which was interesting. So the water in the spring was like running down into a creek and eventually into a river, which all of those things have more or less dried up now. But some of that water was going into a big swale, and it was absolutely incredible. We had a field day there at the end of last year. Over 200 people came. Landcare thought they'd get about 30. 200 people turned up. It was just an amazing day. It was one of those days where the energy was just extraordinary. And we were standing in all this beautiful green grass below the swale. And people were just more or less like taking their shoes and socks off and standing in it, because we haven't seen green grass for so long. And it was just so energising for people to see green in a drought. You know, it just like we have to think about, you know, how it is for us as humans when we see those kinds of landscapes. Like even that drone footage you showed of the creek line with the green trees and the water and that, you know, we're all just really hot-wired to appreciate that, because that's life. Because we die if those things die. And I'll come back to like what Casey was asking about the pasture dieback as well. If we don't have that diversity in there, everything just dies, and we're becoming made more and more aware of those sorts of things. So let's just talk about diversity a little in more detail then. We know that a simplified system is a dysfunctional system, and whether that be in the human gut or the animal gut or the soil. And just to come back to the pasture dieback, I mean, you know, grassland systems here in Queensland are so incredibly simplified. It's just no wonder something is going to go wrong, just as it is in the human body, when we don't have enough diversity in the system. So with human health, we know that many of the current health issues are actually linked to a failure to support a diversity of microbes in the human gut. Not just any microbes, but a wide diversity of microbes. And this was brought home very clearly with the recent American Gut Project. Now, this was a citizen science project. In other words, people actually paid for this. You paid $98 to get a kit that came in the mail, and there was a survey form in there. You had to answer a whole series of questions about, one of the things you had to do was keep a food diary, absolutely everything that you ate every day for a whole week, and also how you felt every day. What was your energy level like? What was your mood like? And did you have any aches and pains? And were you suffering from any kind of autoimmune disorder or any other kind of a disorder? And then at the end of the 7 days, you collected a faecal sample, put it in a special container, sent it off in the mail, and it went to a university that analysed it to see what microbes you had living in your gut. That's all right, you can come up here and do we can do a duo here. I've forgotten what I was going to say next. Oh, and so what they found was that And 11,000 people participated in this. Now, most sort of human health projects are very, very expensive, and you might get 20 people or the most 200 people or something involved in a project because it costs so much money to, even if you're just collecting and analysing blood samples or something. So the fact they had 11,000 people in this project, that people paid, I don't know whether I mentioned that, you paid $98 to get this kit, so you had to pay to participate. And the information you got back was actually what was in your gut microbiome, but then they collated all of that and they found that the people who ate 30 or more different kinds of plants in a week, didn't matter whether you ate masses of meat as well or no meat at all, had nothing to do with how much meat you ate, but everything to do with how many different kinds of plants. So some people think they have a great diet because they eat meat and vegetables, but they keep eating the same vegetables all the time. They might eat half a dozen, like maybe pumpkin, sweet potato, broccoli, peas, carrots or something, and then the next day they'll have the same vegetables, and the next day and say, well, we've got a healthy diet, we're eating vegetables every day, we eat the same vegetables every day. Or you might think you have a healthy breakfast, I make my own muesli, I've got all these different kinds of ingredients in it, and I have, organic biodynamic yogurt with it and organic bananas and etc, etc, etc. That's not what I have, but somebody might say, I have this really healthy breakfast, then you have the same thing the next day and the same thing the next day, so 365 days of the year you're having the same healthy breakfast. Well, it's better than an unhealthy one, but it's not all that great for your gut microbiome because you're not getting enough variety in there. So diversity is something that we have really overlooked for human health. So the people who ate 30, at least, different kinds of plant foods in a week were far healthier, had much more diverse gut microbiomes and didn't suffer from any of the autoimmune disorders that the majority of people are being afflicted with today. Those who ate 10 or less different kinds of plant foods per week were the sickest in the group. And the standard American diet, which is called the SAD diet, Standard American Diet, is mostly great big slabs of meat and potatoes and maybe a lettuce leaf and a slice of tomato or something. People think they're having a salad if they have a lettuce leaf and a tomato. And if you go into a restaurant and ask, what kinds of vegetables do you have on the menu? They'll say, oh, we've got lots of vegetables. Well, can you give me an example of like what you've got on offer tonight? Oh, yeah, you can have baked, fried, mashed, jacket. So in other words, I'll tell you 5 different ways you can cook potatoes. And if it's not potato, it's not a vegetable as far as Americans are concerned. So it's not surprising that there's huge health issues there. And I think this project was very insightful. So I'd suggest that you all start keeping a food diary and have a look to see maybe how repetitive your meals are, how much variety are you getting, and are you getting 30 different kinds of plant foods every week. It's easy to get 20 in a day, but then we often just repeat the same 20 the next day. So the other thing that they found from this project was that the people who were eating meat from confined animal feeding operations, so that could be beef or pork or chicken that had come from like industrially produced, that the animals were being fed on antibiotics because they routinely receive antibiotics in those systems. Their gut microbiome was exactly the same as someone who was on a course of antibiotics. So if you're eating that kind of meat, you are taking antibiotics. They've also found where manures from those confined feeding operations have been used to grow vegetables, that the vegetables have antibiotics in them. So just be very careful about that. Eat your meat by all means if you like your meat. Make sure it's grass-fed, preferably organic or biodynamic or something. Do not eat meat from confined animal feeding operations because that is going to affect your gut microbiome. And believe me, your gut microbiome is very, very powerful in terms of your human health. So how many of you have livestock? How many graziers do we have in the room? Okay, it's about half people. So your livestock, their diet is extremely important for their health as well. And ruminant animals require intake of feeds high in secondary plant compounds. Now those secondary plant compounds are things like bioflavonoids, carotenoids, polyphenols, anthocyanins, all kinds of, they're antioxidants and all sorts of things. You're not going to find them in grasses. So we really have to, you will find a little tiny bit of some of those things in grasses. We really have to get away from this grass-dominated systems that we have in agriculture for grazing animals because you're not going to get very good feed conversion efficiencies on grass. you're going to have animal health issues, and as we're seeing now, you're going to get soil issues. Why we've gone just to grass, I'm not really sure. We've gone down the wrong track there, and I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit further down this talk. If animals are having non-grasses that are high in secondary plant compounds, they will have much higher feed conversion efficiencies, and they can digest a much wider. We think it's the insect that's the problem, or it's the parasite that's the problem, but they're attacking our animals because our animals don't have a good immune system. And we see the same kinds of things happening with plants. So the susceptibility to pests and diseases, low nutrient status in plants, poor plant productivity, all the kinds of problems that we think we have to fix with a different kind of fertiliser or a different kind of insecticide or a fungicide or something, they're actually linked to low diversity in the soil microbiome. And many of our agricultural landscapes have become so simplified that we just really don't even think about it. I mean, drive around and look and see what you see. I mean, here you'll see fields of cane and other things. You'll see pastures that are basically grass, and you take it for granted because that's what you've always seen. And you go to the Midwest of the United States and you'll drive around, you can drive all day, and all you'll see is corn and soy, beans, they say. Corn, beans, corn, beans, corn, beans. You see it, you drive all day and that's all you'll see. And people who grew up in they take it for granted. Go out into the wheat belt somewhere and you'll see, you could drive all day and just see wheat, right? And have we really thought about that? Or you eat the same thing for breakfast and the same thing for lunch and the same thing for dinner every night, more or less, and do you think about that? No. We're not really thinking about the need for diversity in all of our biological systems. It thrives on diversity. So it's not enough to have just green plants. Green plants are great and they're better than bare ground, but diversity really matters. So our natural grasslands, and you probably had savannas here, I guess. What was the original vegetation right here in Mackay? Was it rainforest? Did anybody know? Or was it a savanna here? No information? Simon,
I need your
you know?
help. Anybody who has lived here a bit longer than me?
Well, I'm sort of thinking like 200 years ago, really. So unless someone's on a really diverse diet, we probably haven't got any 200-year-olds. But, I mean, I don't know. What was, yes, do you know what the vegetation was?
Coastal savanna.
Savanna. Okay. And then as we went to higher rainfall, pockets of higher rainfall, you would have gone into tropical forest. Okay, thanks for that answer. So if it was a savanna, coastal savanna, in other words, grasses and trees, or grassland and trees. We should have called them herblands because they would have had hundreds of plant species in them and less than 40% grasses. In fact, the evidence now is suggesting that when we look at the American prairies, I was involved in monitoring in a prairie in Oklahoma last year, and we counted 780 ground cover plants, and only 10% of those were grasses. And it was very, very healthy. So this is a diagram of like an American prairie. You can see lots of different kinds of plants growing in there and all the different root systems. And like I was saying before about the different root architecture and the fact that that is a community of microbes in the soil as well as a community of plants, and that we can sort of mimic that today with our diverse multi-species pastures and multi-species covers. But really we want to be making sure that most of the things we put in there are not grasses, and that most of them are from different functional groups. So in this example here, which is probably not a very diverse one because this is one from New Zealand, and these aren't going to be tropical plants, right? But you've got plantain on the left-hand side. I think that's in the Plantagenaceae family. And then red clover, obviously that's a legume, so that's Fabaceae. And then chicory is a daisy, so that's in Asteraceae. And then pea, that's another Fabaceae. And then ryegrass is in the Poaceae family, the grasses. Lucerne, see that's Fabaceae again. So there's really too many grasses and too many legumes in this mix. We need to have more herbs in there. Beets are in a different family, again, so that's good. Fescues are grass, dandelions are daisy, so it's in the same family as chicory, and then cocksfoot's a grass. So even though people are thinking of that as being a diverse mix, we haven't got enough diversity of functional groups in there for that to really work well. So diverse plant communities support a diverse microbiome, and that is where resilience comes from, and that's where our soil function is going to come from. And I think, as I said before, what we're seeing with the dieback is just a total loss of soil function. It can't work with not enough diversity there. And Casey was telling me during the break this morning that, and most of you would probably be familiar with this, I don't know anything about it, that when the grasses die out, what happens is you get a whole lot of broadleaf plants coming in to occupy that space. So nature is like absolutely, shouting at you, please, please, can we have some non-grass plants here? We need some diversity here, because then, and I think, Sharon, you're right on the right track with your flowers and your other non-grassy things. So, but that's all right. The very fact that things take time and you're doing it. I'm standing here talking about it. You're actually out there doing it. So I take my cap off to you, well and truly, for what, and you will see remarkable things once you. And I also take your point about, harvesting seeds from plants that are on your place. You know that they grow there. I say to people in other parts of the world, go and look what's on the roadsides, and at least see what families they're in. What plant families are growing on the roadsides, even if it might be something that you think of as a weed. But you could find something in the same plant family that if that's growing on the side of the road all by itself with no one helping it, will probably grow in your paddocks, and you can get a cultivated variety of something that like thistles, for example. They're in the daisy family, so you're not going to go out and plant thistles, but there's lots of things in the daisy family that you can plant. So just like looking at those plant families and those functional groups and seeing, well, if they survive in this environment and they're able to survive perfectly well on the side of the road, then they're probably going to grow in my paddock. It's a good chance. We really do need to look at this. So the soil microbiome is something we can't see. This was the photo I put up at the beginning this morning. These are just some of the fungal spores that are in soil. So these are the seeds, if you like, or the spores of fungi. And it's a beautiful world. It's absolutely extraordinary, the life that's in there that, unfortunately, if we could see it, we probably would take more notice of it. But what we want to know is, okay, so we've got some fungi and we've got bacteria and archaea and protists and all the other bigger things as well, like the nematodes and the earthworms and everything. Does this whole soil microbiome, does it actually respond differently if we cross the tipping point? Is there a threshold? Like, how much diversity do we need? I was saying when I showed you this diagram before that I don't think there's enough diversity there because there's not enough diversity in functional groups, even though this would be heaps better than just grass from an animal production perspective, and heaps better than just grass from a soil function perspective. It's going to be a massive improvement, but we could do better. So is there a threshold, and how many different kinds of functional groups do we need? Well, there was a little bit of work done on this back in 2006, and I think you mentioned the year 2006 as well, didn't you? What happened in 2006? Oh, when you bought your property. Well, there you go. Well, in 2006, a group of farmers from North Dakota in the United States, including Gabe Brown, who's become quite famous. How many of you have heard or read about Gabe Brown? And Jay Fuhrer and others went down to a conference in Kansas, no-till on the plains, and they heard a speaker from Brazil, Ademir Caligari, talk to them about cover crops. And Ademir said, well, look, cover crops are great, much better than bare ground. Like if you grow your crop and then you have bare ground and then, you go for a long time before you grow another crop, like that's really, really damaging from the soil. So putting a cover crop's a great idea, but you're not really going to get massive improvements in soil health unless that is a diverse cover crop. So they thought, well, what would this guy from Brazil know about what we're doing here in North Dakota? They thought that they were going so well with what they were doing, but they decided to test his ideas. So they went back, and the Burleigh County Soil Conservation District in North Dakota put together a cover crop demonstration trial. This was back in 2006, so that's, 13 years ago now. You did say 13 years that you'd been on the property, I remember. Okay, so what they did was they planted individual plots of all the things they had been using for cover crops up until that time, like oilseed radish and soybean and cowpeas and whatever. And then they tried 2-way, 3-way, 4-way, 5-way, all the way up to 6-way mixes. and went to all the trouble to set it all out. And the idea was they're going to, measure the dry weights and the metabolizable energy and the protein contents and all these things of these different species in the trial. And then it didn't really rain. Their planting time is like their summertime is May is springtime and late July is the end of summer for them in the Northern Hemisphere. And in that whole time when those plants were growing, because in winter time they're under, this much snow and it's minus 20 or minus 30 or something, they only got 25 millimetres of rain. And so all their monoculture covers failed. They use a circular quadrant. I mean, we call it a quadrant. They probably don't even call it a quadrant. I don't know what they call it, a hoop. I think they use these hoops for measuring dry matter weight. So what they would do is we cut everything inside that hoop and then work out what that weight was in pounds per acre. So America must be the only place in the world, I think, that's still imperial measurements, and farmers talk about bushels per acre, and it's very confusing trying to convert that to tonnes per hectare. But so all their monocultures basically failed. That's the oilseed radish. This is on the 31st of July when they harvested it. And then their six-way mix, which was cowpeas, soybean, turnip, oilseed radish, millet and sunflower, which is a mix of warm season and cool season plants. You'll notice there. Not a huge amount of diversity, but we've got 3 families there who did this. 31st of July, there was absolutely no sign of any water stress at all. And everyone went, right. So diversity is important. And what's going on? How could it be that when you put 6 things together that you would think are all going to compete with each other and are going to be worse than just having one thing, that it actually showed no signs of water stress? And that was when the word cocktail cropping and cocktail mixes became kind of viral in North America, and everyone was talking about cocktail crops, and there was, Google groups and all sorts of stuff, or some kind of email groups anyway, that Google might not have been around back then, with people comparing mixes, what they were putting together, how many different things. And I think Gabe went up to trying 70 or 80 different kinds of plants all in together, just to try and get these amazing results that you get with plant diversity. Then another example I saw of that was in Alberta, back in 2015, in eastern Alberta, where there'd been a field just sown to triticale. This was on a research station. And again, it was a very, very dry year, and the trit had obviously failed and it wasn't going to go through to seed. And over in one corner, the local producers had convinced the research people to put in one of these cocktail crops, because Gabe Brown had been up there talking to them about diversity. So in one corner there was an area probably twice the size of this room, just like a square, I guess it was, rather than a rectangle, of a cover crop. Now this had been sown over the top of the trit, so the whole field had been sown down to triticale, and then they'd come back with this 12-way mix over the top of it. And look at that. No extra water, no nothing, like everything's the same, the soil's the same, the year is the same, the rainfall is the same, and it's growing like that. So those of you who are familiar with triticale, it's a cross between wheat and rye. You can see the triticale heads all through there, and it's like, what drought? It's not showing any signs of water stress compared to the monoculture, and yet there's plenty of room there in the monoculture to grow, plenty of space for it to be able to get water. So how are these plants that are in here all together actually able to get water? That was the big question that came up. So another example comes from Germany, and Julia was trying to help me pronounce the name of this, and I'm going to say Jena. Is that close? And this experiment's been running for 15 years. I mentioned it this morning. The plots are 20 metres by 20 metres, and they've got everything from one kind of thing up to 60 different kinds of things growing together, and they've been running it for quite a long time now. So in this experiment, they've been measuring just about everything that you can think of. In this photograph here, they're collecting the insects. So they've collected all the life that's in the soil, all the life that's like in the phyllosphere, I guess all the things that we can see that's in the phyllosphere. Looked at microbes in the soil, looked at carbon storage in the soil, nitrogen, phosphorus, a whole lot of other minerals, and biomass production. So they've published hundreds of papers out of this experiment. It's probably the best biodiversity experiment that I've ever seen. Of course, coming from Germany, that'd be right. Wouldn't Germans do things so well? So one of the things that they did was have a look at the effect of plant diversity just on nitrogen nutrition. I think this comes up like this afternoon when I talk about nitrogen and phosphorus. So they had just a simple, like a sub-experiment out of their main experiment where they had one kind of plant growing in this 20 by 20 metre area, 1, 2, 4, 8 or 16 different kinds of plants. And if they had 4 plants, they were from four plant species, from 4 functional groups, 4 different functional groups. So then when they had 8, there was 2 each from the 4 functional groups, and when they had 16, there was 4 each from 4 functional groups. So it's not just like 16 kinds of grasses or 16 kinds of legumes. They made sure they got that functional diversity in there. And then they had none 100 or 200 kilos of nitrogen per hectare per year, and it was a multifactorial experiment. So you might have had one kind of plant, like say, well, they didn't have it, but just you could say for this area, like say sugarcane, with none 100 or 200 units of N, or 16 kinds of plants growing in that one thing with none 100 or 200 kilos of N, and all combinations of all of those. What they found was that if they had 8 or 16 different kinds of plants growing together with no nitrogen, they produced more biomass, sequestered more carbon, had more nitrogen in the soil and more phosphorus in the soil available than having 1 or 2 kinds of plants with 200 kilos of nitrogen per hectare per year. And this has all been published in international peer-reviewed scientific journal. So if anybody doesn't believe the results, they can go back and look and see exactly how they did it. There's been research undertaken in Ireland that I heard about when I was there last month under what they call the Smart Grass Project, which is not a very good name for it because they found that grasses were in fact not very good. They're now called the Smart Sward Project the next 3 years. And they looked at mixes of grasses, legumes and herbs like yarrow and tansy and other things like that. And they wanted to see what effect that had on yield, on biomass yield, what effect it had on soil function, what effect it had on animal performance. And it was a study with sheep, and they found that where they had the grasses, the herbs and the legumes all growing in together, that the mix performed better with no nitrogen, had more biomass than perennial ryegrass with 250 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year, could not produce what the mixed sward produced with no nitrogen, and their sheep live weight gains were higher. The lambs reached market weight earlier, and the ewes didn't lose condition with the lambs on them. So the ewe condition was maintained, lambs grew faster, lambs gained more weight, and there was less internal and external parasites on the sheep. So again, there's information coming from around the world how important diversity is. So just to go back to the German experiment again, the Jena experiment. This is from a little video that they have. It's just a screenshot. It's just an 8 or 9 minute video, and I'm sure Julia would be happy to send you the link, or I can send the link. Well, Julia's already got the link, I think. So if you look at the number of species along the bottom axis there's the number of different kinds of plants that you have, and then up on the other axis you have how much biomass is produced. You see as you have more different kinds of plants in the mix, it produces more biomass. So if you're a grazier, that's really important for you. You can produce more bulk by having more different kinds of things in there. They also found that soil carbon increased with more different kinds of plants that they had, and their high diversity plots actually produced more than 20% more carbon than having 1, 2 or 4. Now one of the problems with soil carbon research is that here in Australia, and I would probably be more aware of this than anybody because I've been talking about carbon for about 30 years now, and I probably shouldn't say this because it's on video, but I'm going to say it anyway, Department of Ag and CSIRO, etc., is telling me you can't build carbon in soil, and they say you can't because they go and measure it on their research stations where they have monocultures of grass and lots of fertiliser. Well, no, if you have monocultures of grass and lots of fertiliser and you graze it to, like half an inch all the time, of course you can't build soil carbon. So they've proved that the standard model, conventional practice in Australia, best management practice, should I say, in the southern states at least, doesn't work. If there's anything about the $20 million that got spent on the CSIRO soil carbon project, it shows conventional ag doesn't work and doesn't build soil carbon. But if you get away from that conventional system, you certainly can improve soil function and soil carbon. So this is another little screenshot from the Yena video, just showing all the things that come out of roots. Just the exudates and all the life is actually around plant roots. And here's another little screenshot. On the left-hand side, you have just two kinds of plants growing together. So that could be a grass and a legume or something like that. And it's just showing that with only two kinds of plants growing together, you'll only get a certain depth of soil and no more. You just can't get good deep soil forming when you've got a limited number of kinds of plants. And then in the other graph there, or the other graphic or illustration, they've got 8 different kinds of plants growing together, and the soil formed under those is much deeper. And if you have deeper soil, you're going to have better infiltration, better water holding capacity. And interestingly, people go, oh, we don't really want more water to infiltrate into the soil because, you know, that's what's going to cause waterlogging. Well, actually, that's the thing that prevents waterlogging. And talking about waterlogging, one of the things that happened to the Yena experiment was that they did get waterlogged. The river flooded and all of their research area was sitting underwater for weeks. And you'd think, well, nothing could really survive that. And when the water went down, what they found was that their multi-species mixes were the ones that survived, and their monocultures were the ones that perished under that system. So that soil function that you got under having the diversity of plants helped overcome even that kind of waterlogging. So we know from what we see around the world that diversity will improve plant resilience to drought, and we know from research experience that plant diversity will improve resilience even to waterlogging. And so we're seeing more and more people now incorporating this into their into intensive grazing systems, particularly in places where it's, you know, you've got smaller areas and lots of animals and you can afford to spend that kind of money. I understand that in an environment like this where you've got large areas, you have to do sorts of things Sharon's doing, like collect seed and broadcast seed and just do it however you can. But where people can afford to actually plant multi-species forages, we're seeing more and more of this kind of thing. This is a photograph from New Zealand on a dairy farm. There's virtually no grasses in there. It's just all, what is that photo? Like that's chicory and plantain and brassicas and those sorts of things. In fact, they didn't plant, I don't think they planted any grasses at all. No grasses in that mix. So we're seeing more and more mixes with no grasses in them for grazing. And animal health is through the roof without the grasses in the system. Soil health is improving. Again, I don't know where we got this thing from that we have to have grasses for grazing. So plant diversity improves animal nutrition, growth rates, milk production, and not only important for dairy farmers, but important for anybody raising animals, obviously. Conception rates, same in humans, and reduces dependence on vets and builds soils. So diverse systems are self-organising. It's all to do with the microbes, as I was talking about this morning. The microbes know what to do. So we just need to basically manage for above. If we manage for above ground diversity, then we will get below ground diversity, and then all the details will take care of themselves. We haven't even got the capacity to be able to analyse what's going on in there. Anything we do in the laboratory can really only be one kind of plant and one kind of microbe. And even when we're looking at one kind of microbe, if you chose something like mycorrhizal fungi, for example, you can still then just only use one species of that, and there's hundreds of species of that. So it's, you know, by nature, reductionist science has to be reductionist because you can't conduct a scientific experiment with thousands of different kinds of microbes and dozens of different kinds of plants. It's just not possible. When we get to that kind of diversity, we can only look at the big picture, and it needs to be a big picture. It is a holobiome. We are living in a holobiome, and we need to just step back from it and basically get out of the way, understand what the effects of all the chemicals that we use in agriculture are having, including things that some people think are benign, like nitrogen and phosphorus. They're definitely not benign, not because they so much themselves are poisons, but because they interfere with the communication between the microbes that we need to work for us. So we probably never will understand the details, but if we manage for above ground diversity, then a lot of the details will take care of themselves. And one of the things that, again, we may not necessarily have thought of, just like we probably don't think about the fact that we have the same thing for breakfast every day, is that we really need more flowers in our systems, because this is a photo of Gabe Brown's vegetable garden, his chaos garden he calls it. The flowers they're incredibly important for animal nutrition. A lot of your secondary plant compounds are in there. The things that give flowers colour are, secondary plant compounds. And like even for human health, what is it that they say we have to eat? 5 or 7 or some magic number? It should really be 30, but what is it? The rainbow salads or something, all the different colours. Get your reds and your oranges and your greens and all those. Well, the reason that you want to have all those colours in there is those pigments are secondary plant compounds. They're anthocyanins and isoflavonoids and polyphenols and things like that, that they're really good for your gut. That's why the colours are important. And the colours are important for animal health as well. And of course they're important for all our, predatory and pollinators, predatory insects and pollinators. So Gabe Brown's Chaos Garden is a 3-acre garden, so I suppose what's that, a little bit over a hectare. He grazes it down really hard and then grazes it again and grazes it again to shorten the roots on the pasture that's there. And then no chemicals, comes in with a direct drill. He's got a seed box with 20 different kinds of vegetables in it, 20 different kinds of flowers, just mixes it all up together and plants it. And it's all so close and so dense, there's no room there for any weeds. So it never has to be weeded, so it's totally organic without him having to apply anything to it or worry about maintaining it. He sells into the farmers market every weekend, and he employs people that morning, probably at, 4 o'clock or something that morning. People come in and, well, you go and pick corn, you pick tomatoes, you pick zucchinis, you pick beans, you pick parsley, you pick silver beet. Just everyone's just got something different. They just walk through that field and just you pick what it was that you were told to pick that day. So the only work in maintaining that garden is actually in picking the stuff. Then he had a problem with raccoons who decided that the tomatoes and the corn and everything was very nice, thank you very much. So every raccoon in North Dakota decided it was going to come and eat from Gabe's garden. And he thought, well, now what can I do? Because I'm supposed to be friendly to the wildlife as well as to the microbes. And he ended up putting a buffer zone all around the edge of these pumpkins or squash or whatever they are that have really, if you grow zucchinis or something, how the underside of the leaves are really prickly. If you put your hand down even just to pick the zucchinis, I know I get a rash on my arm from that. Well, the raccoons with their soft little noses, they didn't like those prickly leaves, and so they wouldn't come through the squash plants around the outside, and his garden was safe. So there's lots of things we can think about, for our diversity. But some of the flowers that I like, so in this photo there's cosmos in there, and I can't quite see. One of those red ones. I'm not sure what they are, but anyway, they're all edible flowers, by the way. And now sometimes if you go to a top-end restaurant somewhere, they'll put flowers on your plate, which you can eat. And so a lot of the flowers we can eat, but make sure you do know what they are, because some flowers, of course, will kill you. So but if we can eat them, obviously cattle can eat them. So these are the flowers on chicory, which sometimes is used, the root of chicory is used for imitation coffee. And so anything we can eat is safe for livestock. And of course the pollinators love this. There's always bees on the chicory. I don't know whether the chicory grows up here, does it, Simon? It does? Oh, that's amazing. I just think that's an extraordinary plant because it grows everywhere from all kinds of climates all over the world. Chicory will grow. That's why I thought it might have been too hot for it here. What about this one? That's evening primrose. Is it too hot for that up here? Evening primrose, will it grow? That's a really, really beneficial plant. Now, the oil from that, some people take evening primrose oil. It's a medicinal oil for humans, but it is a fantastic plant. It's very drought tolerant, incredibly drought tolerant. Yarrow, too far north for yarrow? Don't know. Tansy. These are the cosmos. Cosmos would grow up here because it's wild. It's a wild one from South Africa. If you could get cosmos started in your swales, you'll have it forever. Oh, great. That's one of my favourites, and that comes in a whole range of colours, as you know, whites and everything. It's just so pretty. In South Africa, you see it growing all along the sides of the road, and you'll never see one in the paddock because the cows eat it. But when you change your grazing management, like to rotational grazing, it gets a chance to grow. So, or in any areas where they can't get at it, they love it. And we can eat that. Like, we can eat the and there's a yellow one grows in North America, a native cosmos that the Native American Indians, Native Americans, I should say, sorry, ate the cosmos flowers. Delphiniums is another one. That's my veggie garden at home. So there's always insects in the delphiniums. And again, just cosmos and sunflower growing in with corn and celery. I think that is in there. These sorts of mixes we're seeing more and more around the world. You know, your sunnies in there, and radish grow up here. And also there's some legumes in there too. And who's this? Thanks for that photo, Simon. It has been shown in all four corners of the globe. I just love that photo. Of course, the sunnies, sunflowers in the cane, and there's other things in there too, isn't there? That you had a multi-species mix. I think you had a 12-way mix or something in that particular photo. Anyway, yes. So we need those kinds of flowers, and also in vineyards and other horticultural enterprises. One of the flowers here is this one. On your right, the little white one at the bottom, is sweet alyssum. Will that grow up here? It's a common thing in gardens. You'll know that if you've got that in your garden, you'll always have that in your garden. It's something that keeps coming up, but it's wonderful. It comes in a whole range of colours, and if it's something that's, you know, grows without you really looking after it, think about having that out. You know, why not have that out in pastures, and why not have that out in vineyards? Why not have it in mango orchards or banana orchards or whatever? You know, like if it's things that want to grow, then just take notice of what. Oh, and the other thing that's the purple one there on the left is Phacelia. Does that grow up here? Yes. Wow. No.
I haven't been able to go and grow it prolifically like you'd expect it to grow, but it does struggle.
Might be too hot for it. I mean, Phacelia will grow in Alaska, so I'm really surprised that it does blow me away, the wide range of some of the plants. There's a project underway in the United States called STRIPS, STRIPS, and they're prairie strips. So what they are is like about 10% of the cornfield is actually, so that's corn, but sown down to prairie wildflowers. So that's basically what it looks like inside a strip. And they have found that even though they haven't integrated plants into the corn itself, just by having those prairie strips, they've got increased yield, or increased profit, I should say. Increased profit in the corn. And the reason they've got increased profit is because they've now got all these predatory insects and pollinators and everything in the prairie strip. And so your inputs for your corn are way, way less. You know, there's a huge amount of chemical goes onto corn. It's just extraordinary, and you don't need those chemicals if you've got your flowers in there as well. So they're not even actually fully integrated. It's not intercropped. It's just having strips through the crop. So that could be another way of putting things through cane, I guess, would be to have strips rather than integrating things, if integrating is difficult. I've got a booklet here from Green Cover Seeds. Again, this is like for temperate climates, so maybe not so tropical. This is from this group are in Kansas, and that's a photograph of that's their facility there, those buildings in the background, and these are some of their demonstration trials. Although Kansas is very hot and steamy in summertime, so even though it's under snow in winter, I guess a lot of the things that grow there in summer could certainly be useful. Now this booklet, it's free in the United States, but unfortunately if you wanted to get it in Australia, you'd have to pay for postage on it. But it's online, so I can send the link to this. In the back of this booklet, there's a whole lot of articles in here on soil health. This lady called Christine Jones wrote something in there on quorum sensing, and I don't know who she is. But right at the back, there's all these... try and find it, Christina. Anyway, I have to take my word for it. I can't find it now. There's 120 different... it's supposed to be. Oh, there they are. There's 120 different crop plants listed in the back. So there's pages and pages of... There's a description there of every kind of like there's a photograph of all the different cover crop species, and then what time of the year they grow, and a whole lot of information about them. So there's 120 things that American farmers can choose from there for their cover crops. And then on their own farm, they grow a lot of the seed themselves, but they also have these demonstrations. And the thing that I liked about their cover crop trials was all the different flowers. That's really why I put these photos in there. That's Keith Burns. He's one of the brothers that owns this business. They were linked up with that mob in North Dakota. They were up at one of the things that Gabe Brown was speaking at, and someone said, you know, there'd be a great future in actually selling cover crop seeds to farmers, because this is going to be the way of the future. This diversity is going to be the way of the future. So these two brothers, Keith and his brother Brian, they were just had a corn farm in Nebraska, and they decided to just take a leap of faith and start growing cover crops and selling cover crops. And now, as I said, they've gone from just the two brothers in a very short time. They've got something like 52 staff members now, and all the facilities that you saw in the background there, like there's millions of dollars worth of infrastructure there. They've got big seed mixers and everything's automatic. So all of those grain storages, they're like a cone shaped, you know, at the bottom they just come down in cone shape, and they just press a button and they get this many kilos of this and this many kilos of that, and a big mixer that mixes it all. So you can just get like 1 tonne bags of, you know, any mixture of any combination of anything that you like, up to 120 different things. So that makes it really easy for American farmers to order cover crop seed and to be able to grow it, mix diverse cover crop seed, So they have field days there with people come look at all the different things, the yellow flowers, the different kinds of mustards. And like even with mustard, there's like 3 or 4 main varieties that all flower at different times. So even if you put 4 kinds of mustard together, they'll flower over quite an extended period, because each one will come in to flower at different times. I don't know how clear these photos are, but that's flax. Will that grow up here? Or is it too hot, for flax? Yeah, linseed. Not very well, too hot for it. Again, that's a cool season thing, really. And Phacelia, which we talked about before. And of course, when you get your flowers, you get all the other things that go with flowers. And we hear people talk about, you know, bee colony decline, or whatever it is, that's colony collapse that's happening, you know, all around the world. So our little bees, this is a little blue-banded bee, which is a native Australian bee. I've got that one in my garden at home, which is really lovely. Just to see all these things come in, you know, when you have the flowers. So I've left plenty of time for questions today, because there was a lot of questions that came up about diversity this morning. So go for it with questions. Or did we do all the questions this morning, maybe?
I'm sure there will be a few more. Who would like to get started? Yep.
Instead of a question as such, I'll just go back to one of those questions we had earlier today, and you talked a bit about mixing different varieties of grass. So during my research, one of the things I came across was the advantage of mixing different species of grass, and this work was particularly done in rice, wasn't so much in a biological below ground diversity. It was actually the insect benefit that they found above. So in particular, what I'm talking about is mixing old heirloom varieties of rice. This work was predominantly done in rice, but also in wheat. Farmer heirloom varieties in a lot of third world countries are seed lines that have been kept by farmers for generations. And they've been kept by those farmers because those varieties are particularly hardy and will always give the farmer something to eat. And that's what they're relying on. Doesn't matter how dry it gets, how wet it gets, whatever insect pressure there is, they know that variety, they'll have something to eat that year. And what they've done in more recent times is mix those heirloom farmer varieties with high production modern varieties. And they're trying to get an increase in production and an increase in hardiness of those high production varieties, or protection for them from insect attack predominantly. And they've found that to be very successful. So it's a way of increasing the production without having to use chemicals. And a lot of these third world producers can't afford to buy fertiliser, they can't afford to buy seed even. So it's a way of better feeding a lot of these people. So I took that idea and tried to extrapolate it into cane, and I mixed Q208 and Q190 as a bit of an experiment. I've actually harvested that, well, this has been ongoing for a number of years now. First off, I had to plant the two varieties, new seed sourced from clean seed plot, planted next to each other. Then the following year I harvested that by hand and planted it together. Then the following year I harvested that with a cane harvester and planted it in the billet fashion. And that crop has now been harvested and sent to the mill. And it, production-wise, works quite well. But how well it will work over time remains to be seen. But what I was trying to achieve out of that is increased resistance to Pachymetra root rot. 208 is a susceptible variety to Pachymetra. 190 is one of our much more resistant varieties. 190 is a high production variety in tonnes, but low production in sugar. 208 tends to be higher production in sugar, but not so much in tonnes. And for me, 208 tends to stand up better, but 190 tends to lay down. So what I'm trying to do by mixing those two varieties is increase production through reducing Pachymetra root rot and increase standability and increase actual physical sugar production per hectare. So we'll wait and see how many ratoons I can get out of that crop and how it progresses. But that's what you're trying to do by mixing varieties of the same sort of grass. They're the potential benefits that you could get. And the same would apply to any plant species, I feel. So there's many more benefits than just biological benefits, so to speak. It's that whole of system thing.
That's a really good point, Simon, because some of the people that are now putting wheat varieties together, for example, they might put, like, say, 4 varieties of wheat together, and then if we get a late frost, in the early seedling stages, or an early frost when things are just heading up, you know that at least 2 of those varieties, like if you've got some shorter season and longer season varieties in together,
yep,
something will get through. That's the whole thing, that even if you get half a crop through, if you get 2 of the 4 get through, you're better off than everyone else that got their crop wiped out because they just had one variety and we got a frost right at initiation or something and they get no seed. So I think we're hedging our bets really by having... And then, of course, that's just looking at it purely from that point of view. There's all the other benefits from the soil microbiome. I'm sure there's huge benefits there as well. And like you're looking at things like disease resistance and those kinds of things, like just having that kind of variety is going to help. Yep. Even a little bit of variety helps. Like even if it's variety, as I said, and if we look at endophytes, all your sugars will have, your cane will all have different endophytes in it. And that will help too, just having a mix of those.
Yeah. That
they all bring their own endophytes with them.
I had another comment about weeds. So that came up earlier today too, and you would think that weeds would add diversity. If I just look at sugarcane in particular, I don't think those weeds that we commonly find in our sugarcane paddocks are adding anything in the way of diversity. They are merely Mother Nature's answer, trying to fill a gap that you've created. But she's filled it with a plant that is resistant to the bad biological makeup that you've created in your soil. And that's why that plant's there now. And a classic example is blackberry nightshade. Now I see more and more blackberry nightshade in my cane paddocks today than I used to. Well, blackberry nightshade just happens to be highly resistant to nematodes. It can handle them. Like its roots can be loaded with nematode damage, and it just keeps powering on. It just ignores them, basically. And nematodes are a real problem in sugarcane that's probably not getting the recognition that it needs. But the answer to it will be plant diversity, in my opinion, to
Choose your weed.
overcoming that.
Choose your weed.
Yeah.
Yeah, put
Most of
something
our
else in.
weeds will not be beneficial to us. They're just there simply because they can weather the storm.
Yeah, so by choose your weed, I mean you put some things there that you want so that there's no room for the weeds. That's
Well,
what I mean by choose your weed.
Yeah, beneficial
Because if you
to
leave
you.
it bare, then there'll be, beneficial to you. If you leave it bare, something's going to come in.
You-
Choose what you're going to put there.
Yeah. You're trying to address underlying soil health issues. That's for me, plant diversity, that's what I'm trying to do. I know what my underlying soil health issues are, and probably for a lot of you they will be the same. Primarily they're a lack of organic carbon, compaction, and for me, calcium. So plant diversity helps me address all of those issues, and there will be many different plants that I can bring into the system to help me address those issues. Well, one of our problems is we don't have people like you just talked about in the United States that are actively growing and grading and selling cover crop seed, diversity of seed. So seed production in this space is something that will happen over the next few years. It has to. But at the moment it's difficult to get seed in any sort of variety, and it's also very difficult to get quality seed in any sort of variety. There's been things like people use bird seed mixes, so quite often you can buy a bag of bird seed at your local feed store. The first thing to remember about doing that is that in a lot of cases that grain will be cracked, so that the actual birds that are eating it can better eat that seed. So if it's cracked, it's not going to come up. The second thing is you never know where that grain has come from. Quite often, sunflower, for instance, it will be imported seed that's been remixed. And if it's been imported from the United States in particular, or just about anywhere, it will be irradiated. So its vigour, even if it does come up, will be next to nil, but most of the time it won't come up at all. So yeah, you can get a diverse mix like that, but you never know what you're going to get. It's
So
a
just to
cheap
add
way of
to
doing
that,
it,
Simon,
but it could be a
is-
dear way of doing it.
Is that using birdseed mix became very popular, like last year, the year before. A lot of people down south were like getting huge supplies of like bulk bags of birdseed mix, and the companies that are producing it are now pasteurising it so that it won't germinate.
Yeah.
Because they didn't want people bypassing the system and using a cheap cover crop mix. So can you believe that? To actually stop people from having a diversity of plants and using a cheap source like birdseed mix. Like you said, it's probably going to be inferior quality anyway. But now a lot of people said, we bought birdseed mix and absolutely nothing came up. And so we found out that they are actually pasteurising the seed, so it's dead.
I think of seed as a bit like, remembering that I'm still a farmer, like fertiliser. So I still buy bagged fertiliser, and I don't know how soon or if